Hola, bienvenido en este video. Yo sé este video no es sobre dibujar porque hoy voy a entrenarse tú. Todo lo sé sobre español. I probably didn't understand a word of what I said there, but that is fine because in this video I'm going to learn you everything I learned about Spanish in the course of 1.5 years. So let's just get right into the video. So in Spanish, the letters are pretty equal as in the English alphabet, but the difference is that some Spanish letters are different, such as an N with a little line over. The thing that is special with this letter is that it's not pronounced like N, it's pronounced like ni. For example, if we use this for the Spanish word boy, niño, you don't say that word N-E-N-E-U, you just have an N with a line over. And then you may wonder, what are those letters with a small little line over? Do they have any special meaning? Well, I'm gonna tell you what. Those letters are the same as in English, but you put extra pressure on it. So for example, in the word que, then you put extra pressure on the E at ends because it has a line over like that. And then you may wonder, what about those question marks and stuff like that in Spanish? Why are there two of those? And why is the first one upside down? Well, they have the exact same meaning as in English, just that you will first take a question mark upside down, and then I don't remember what the other mark is called. And then there are some letters which of course are the same as English, but they are pronounced differently. So for example, I don't know if you have heard of the place Mallorca. It's like an island of Spain, but guess what? It ain't pronounced Mallorca. It's pronounced like Mallorca because there are two L's. And when there are double L's, it's pronounced differently. It's don't pronounce it. So if you write my name is in Spanish, it's going to be me llamo. It's kind of pronounced like a J actually. Also, X in Spanish is pronounced differently. So Mexico is not Mexico, it's Mexico. And then there the H is always silent. So, for example, if you're going to say hola, did you hear that? I said hola, not hola. If you say hola, that's wrong. Also, G is also pronounced different. So, for example, in Spanish word for people, gente, you pronounce that in a different way. You don't pronounce gente, you pronounce gente. So, now you have a little bit of understanding on how Spanish letter works and what things are silent and not silent, and I think that will help you very much along the way when you're going to learn basic phrases in the next step. Now that you know how to pronounce Spanish letters and stuff like that, it's time to learn some basic phrases. One of them I learned you previously, which is me llamo, and that means my name is. But how do you ask someone what their name is? ¿Cómo te llamas? What is your name? And then you have some basic ones you probably know, like sí is yes, and no is no, and hola, which I mentioned previously, is hello, and adios is goodbye. And then, what if you want to say like hello, good day to a Spanish person, or good evening, or good night? Well, the way you do that is that you either take buenos dias for good morning, buenas tardes for good afternoon, and buenas noches for good night. And then also, if you want to hear how a Spanish person are you doing, like how are you doing, that is ¿cómo estás? And in Spanish, how are you? Or you can say ¿qué tal?, which have the same meaning, but the most normal one to use is probably ¿cómo estás?, the one you often learn, so yeah. Now we're going to start with grammar in Spanish, which is easier than in English, but it's still some things you just have to learn. So first we are going to tell you how to bend adjectives and nouns. So nouns and adjectives can be like two genders. I don't know if that's what you call it, but yeah, it's probably mostly like that. And that a masculine or feminine word. So if a word is masculine, it's un in front of it for a or an, and ve is l, unos is a or an in plural, and los is ve in plural. But how do you know which words are masculine and which words are feminine? Well, I'm first going to tell you masculine because we are on that right now. The way you can see that is that they often have an O or E ending. Sometimes they end with a different letter, but like the next last letter is E or O, and in that case it's masculine. It's not always like this, but most of the times it's like this. The way I use feminine nouns is pretty much the same way. You take la for ve, una for a or an, unas for a or an in plural, and las if you want to use ve in plural. So now that you know these things, how do you know noun is feminine? Well, it often ends with a or the next last letter ends with a. It's also exceptions to this, but most of the times it's like that. And the nice thing is that like a noun you use in sentences in Spanish is like kind of the boss of the sentence. So the adjectives bends after that. If you want to say un gato, which is a masculine noun, which means a cat. If you want to say it's pretty, it's like un gato bonito. And why I did say bonito and not bonita is because the noun is masculine. And in feminine it's the same. You use bonita if you want to have a pretty. If you want to say a feminine noun is pretty. First, now I'm going to learn you verbs, which is going to be a long section of this video because the way I'm going to bend verbs in Spanish is quite different. So the first kind of verbs I'm going to learn you is the regular verbs in presence. So when you're talking about things that is happening right now, like yo vivo, I live, and then we're also going to learn in the past and in the future towards in this video, and irregular verbs, but 96% of verbs in Spanish is regular, so this works for most verbs in the present. So the first thing is that verbs in Spanish can have 3 different endings. It can either end with ir, ar, or er, and these verbs are bent differently. So if you start with ar verbs, take away the ar. So for example, in the R, and you add an O. So O is the I form, which is you add an O. You take away the AR and you place an O instead. And then you do the exact same with the other words, verbs, just that you have different, just that you're not talking about me. The U form, which is tú in Spanish, then you take AS. And for the L/ella, he or she, you take just an A. And then in the nosotros form, or we form, so if you're talking about we are going to or we are eating, it's amos. And the vosotros form, it's pretty. This is a form which you don't necessarily have to use a lot, but you're going to teach it in this video. Learn. Okay, this form is used in Spain, and it's like taking we or you in like a more polite manner. So that one is ais, and ellos, which mean they, is an. Okay, now you learned for the AR verbs. Now you're going to learn the endings for yo, I, o, tú, you, es, él/ella, he or she, nosotros, we, hemos, vosotros, eis or we, in a polite manner, ellos or they, and. Okay, now we have learned 2 different forms. ER verb I, O, everyone ends with O, tú, es, él/ella, he or she, nosotros, we, hemos, vosotros, we in polite manner, is, ellos or they, and. So now you have learned regular verbs in present form in Spanish. Let's use this knowledge in action. So for example, if you say the word cocinar, yo cocino, tú cocinas, the verb means to cook, by the way. Él/ella cocina, nosotros cocinamos, vosotros cocináis y ellos cocinan. And for irverbs, like for example, vivir. Yo vivo, tú vives, ella vive, nosotros vivimos, vosotros vivís y ellos viven. And then let's take a ER verb, like poner, which means to put. Yo pongo, tú pones, ella pone, nosotros ponemos, vosotros ponéis y ellos ponen. Okay, so now I'm going to learn you irregular verbs. Most of the times the verbs are bent in the same way, just that sometimes instead of o, it's oi. And with these verbs, you don't just take away the er, ar, or er ending and add on. They have a totally, it's like a totally new word than in the base form. So this one you just have to learn, and that is kind of annoying, but it's just how the language works. And yeah, I'm going to learn you 3 verbs, which is very good to know, which are irregular and will help you a lot in Spanish in the future. And they are er, ar, and er verbs. So for example, first you can take ir, which means to go. Yo voy, tú vas, ella va, nosotros vamos, vosotros vais y ellos van. That's the way you bend the word ir, which means to go, and then estar, which means to be. Yo estoy, tú estás, ella está, nosotros estamos, vosotros estáis y ellos están. And then it's ser, which also means to be, but these 2 verbs kind of means the same, but they're used in different settings. So yo soy, tú eres, ella es, nosotros somos, vosotros sois y ellos son. That's the way irregular verbs in present works. Okay, now you learned how to use verbs in the future, but if you're talking to someone in Spanish, it's pretty boring to just talk about the right now, right? You'll probably want to talk about experiences you have had, or maybe plans for the future. Well, now I'm going to learn you the future form, and it's actually pretty simple. So the first thing you do is that you take the verb ir, which we learned previously, and you use it in the form that is appropriate. So for example, voy, which means I'm going, and you add an a, and then you add verb in infinitive or base form. So an example of this is voy a cocinar, I'm going to cook, or voy a ir, I'm going to go. Or you can use this in other settings, not like van a ir al el cine, they are going to the cinema, for example. So now you're going to learn how to talk about the past and experiences you have done before. So this one is sadly pretty much harder than in the future form, but you're going to learn them. So it's pretty much like talking in the present, just that now you have different forms in the regular verbs in the past. AR verbs in the past tense goes like this. Yo, tú, haste, ella, o, nosotros, hamos. It's actually the same as in the present. Vosotros hasteis y ellos harán. So it's pretty different, as you can see. Let's use this knowledge in action. Yo hablé, tú hablaste, ella habló, nosotros hablamos, vosotros hablas, vosotras hablasteis y ellos hablaron. But the nice thing about bending these verbs in the past tense is that er and ir verbs are bent the same way. So the way those 2 categories are bent are yo, y, tú, iste, ella, yo, nosotros íbamos, vosotros isteis y ellos irán. Let's use this knowledge in action now. Yo comí, tú comiste, ella comió, nosotros comimos, vosotros comisteis y ellos vieron. Yo viví, tú viviste, ella vivió, nosotros vivimos, vosotros vivisteis, y ellos vivieron. Now you know regular verbs in the past tense and how to bend them. I don't know how this works with irregular verbs yet, but I think it's kind of the same way as verbs in presence. Now that you learned how to use verbs in Spanish, it's time to learn how to tell the clock. And it's not really the hardest thing, I think, but to do this you need to know some of the verbs which I learned here previously, so you already know them, and you need to be able to count to 30, or I think you only need to 29, but I'm gonna learn you 30 anyways. So these numbers are, the first one you probably know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but after that it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the numbers from 11 to 15 are kind of different because normally you just have the word for 10 or 20 or 30 and then you add on the number afterwards. So 17, for example, is 17, 25 is 25. So those 5 numbers you just have to learn, but after that the system is pretty logical. So they are 11, 12, 13, 14 y 15, which is 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. And then after that it's 16, 17, 18, 19. Since you know the numbers to 10 now, I think you know what those means, obviously. 16, 17, 18 and 19. And then after that 20 is 20. But to say 20 and a number, you have to say it in one word. This is actually kind of special because after 20, when you come to 30, you say like 31 for 31. But here you don't say 21, you say 21. So the numbers after that is 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29 y 30. So then you know a couple of numbers, then you are ready to learn how to tell and ask someone what the clock is. So the way I ask what the clock is just to say these 3 pretty simple words. ¿Qué hora es? And the way I answer is to say son las and then what the clock is. Or es la, you could say if the clock is 1 because then it's not plural, then it's only 1 letter, but when it's 2 to 12 it's son las. It's usually son las. An example of this, which you can use already, knowing these numbers, is like ¿Qué hora es? Son las 9. But what if you want to say like the clock is 10:30 or 2:45? How do you say that? Well, I'm going to learn you, because you need to know some words to tell this. For example, if you want to say it's over something, like for example, the clock is 15 minutes over 5, it's like you use the word y, which I've actually said a lot in this video, which means and. So for example, if you say son las 2:10, that means the clock is 10 minutes over 2. So this makes total sense, right? And then if you want to say it's like 10 minutes to 5, for example, you can say son las 5 menos 10. It makes sense. Like, just think of menos as minus. So yeah. And then some things that can be good to know here is some words like medio or media you can use as, instead of saying 30, 30. like for example, son las 10:30. The clock is 10:30. Does this make sense, right? So, and then you can also, instead of saying 15, son las 2:15, you can say son las 2:15. Okay, so this makes sense. So yeah, I think you have all the things right now to know how to tell the clock. If you want to tell if the clock is in the morning or in the afternoon, you just say en la tarde or en la mañana. That's all I learned.